So Jupyter Notebooks. Yeah. Oops. What are they? Before I start getting deep into that, how many of you have seen the webinar on Jupyter Notebooks? Okay, you can take a nap now. I'll wake you up with a clap when there's something new. So what are Jupyter Notebooks? Jupyter Notebooks are documents. They're superficially similar to, say, a PDF document. Looks like on the screen like a paper. But underneath that, there's so much more than that. Because not only is it a document with formatting like you're used to, but you can also have code inside that's executed right there in the document. And you can not just have text and code there, but the code can result in some rich output, something that you not normally would see in, say, an APL session, or something you would have to copy into a word processor. But it can be generated right there in the notebook. So here's an example. The classic thing is to use Python for Jupyter Notebooks. And if we zoom in a little bit on this, then you can see that there's some code on top, a dark background, and the result of that has been a map with some data. Now the new thing is that we can do the same thing for APL. So here's an APL Jupyter Notebook, and we have some code, and it results in a nice chart at the bottom. Why do you want to use Jupyter Notebooks? Because you don't have to split up your work. Often you have an academic paper that has some footnotes or appendix at the end with some of the implementation of the things that are being discussed. And you don't need to do that. Rather, you can concentrate on the subject. And then right there, with the text that describes how a problem is being solved or approached, you also have the implementation of that text. And the same thing goes the other way. You could have some code with some comments, but there's limit to what you can put in comments. So often you would have an accompanying document to the code that describes some things in the code. But here you don't need to, because you can have rich, formatted descriptions, explanations, right inside together with your code. And so this is really good for presenting academic ideas, for explaining to one's peers how to calculate something. It's good for teaching a certain subject. You can have easily read text and the code right there with it. So it reads pretty much like, say, Mastering Dyalog APL, the book, but it's not a flat piece of paper. Rather, the reader can go in and change the code, and right there in the book, the results are being changed. And so it's good for also teaching just APL. You can describe how APL works, and you can see little pieces of it in between. So this has become really, really popular. It's been around, this idea about the notebook, this mixture of text, proper text, and code for a while. But until now, until Jupyter Notebooks, it has always been kind of a isolated thing. You have a programming language or a programming environment, and it had its own format of notebooks. And it wasn't really very, very portable. It just belonged there. And so it never really took off seriously anywhere. But what's special about Project Jupyter and their notebook format is that they allowed having a language kernel associated with your notebook. And that means you could use any language. You just need to implement the kernel, which is not a very complicated thing to do. And then it just fits into the system. You plug it in there, and you can have a notebook that calls for a certain language, and then the Jupyter system will start up that kernel and execute the expressions. So the name Jupyter kind of comes from the first 3 languages that were usable with the Jupyter Notebook, Julia, Python, and R. But now there are a whole bunch of languages and more being added all the time. And we now have Dyalog APL as one of these. The scientific community has really taken to this. Some of them describe this as a revolution. They just start doing everything in Jupyter Notebooks. The whole trouble about various papers and codes and difficulties with programming fades away for them, and you can have the subject matter experts concentrate on what's important to them, focus on the algorithms of the tools they need, and not on the programming. There are some different ways you could use Jupyter Notebooks. The classic way is that you install a Python system. Don't worry, you don't have to write any Python code. And that comes with the Jupyter system. And that you can use to start up a server, and you can open a notebook. And it just works. It opens it up in the browser, and it pretty much just seems like a word processor. You don't worry about what's running underneath. And you can also go online, and there are various free or paid or for registration services that allow you to run Jupyter Notebooks, open Jupyter Notebooks in the browser without having to install anything on your own computer. When you have a Jupyter Notebook and there's some code that's been executed there, there's some results that are being showed, they can be stored in the notebook itself. So it's very much a file in flux when you're using it. And then somebody else can view everything, the whole document, including the results, without having to even have the language kernel. They just have to have the ability to open Jupyter Notebooks, just have to have a generic system installed. But of course, they can't re-execute any APL if they don't have an APL kernel there. And then from there on, you can output it in various formats that are very portable and known. So first, just have a look at how the classic way of using it, running your own local server. You have a Python system. We recommend Anaconda, which is a really, really popular Jupyter system. So that's the base. That's the one that's in control. And it starts up a server, a rather generic server. And then it has a kernel that it can start. And the kernel is the interrupt between the server, the Anaconda platform, and some third-party interpreter, which in the classic case is also Python, but it doesn't have to be. And then you have a web browser. And so the way it works is the web browser, of course, loads a page, it gets from the server, and then it can make a request for some of this language to be executed, and the server uses the kernel to send the request over to the interpreter. The interpreter has no idea that it's dealing with a Jupyter Notebook. It just sees some code and executes it, sends the result back to the kernel, and the server then takes that and sends it right back in the browser, and you get the result there. And so when we do it in APL, we start off with the same thing. We have the Anaconda platform, we have the server running, that's all the same. But we now have the Jupyter kernel for Dyalog. And of course, we have a Dyalog interpreter running on the side. And then we have the web browser, and everything just works exactly the same way, and we get the results back. Interesting to notice is that between this kernel and the interpreter, we're using the write protocol, which was really made for write to be able to communicate with the interpreter. But having this open, general purpose language that can be spoken to the interpreter to tell the interpreter what to do and get instructions back from the interpreter on what has to happen, that has additional benefits that we didn't think about to begin with, but now we can see how easy it is. So we actually handed it off to some people who barely knew anything about APL to write this kernel. Anybody could really write that. You don't need to know APL, you just need to know the language, which is well documented, the write protocol. So this is how you set it up by yourself, practically speaking. You have to have Dyalog, of course. You have to have a Jupyter kernel. Then you install Anaconda, and then you just launch it. And the installation instructions you can find on a wiki. We heard earlier in the program how every GitHub repository can have its own wiki, and that's what we use here. There's a rather extensive wiki there. And let's try it. So this is how the wiki looks, and what we're going to do now is the offline usage. We're going to have our own server. First thing is we need to install Dyalog. I bet most of you have that. Then we need Anaconda. It's really easy to install. You go to the Anaconda website, press download, and you know, yes, through everything. Then you need to get this repository, which is the kernel. Not very difficult to do. You have this zip file you download, and then you open it up. And then if you see in the instructions right here, it will say you have to run an appropriate installer. It's right there. You may see a flash. I don't know if you could see it. That's it. It's installed. That's it. Now it's all installed. Now we can start it. Here we go. Jupyter Notebook. Easiest way to find it in Windows is to write Jupyter Notebook in the Start menu. And so this is going to start the web server. And this is how it looks. You could mistake it for an Explorer window, a file finder thing, but it's just a web page that's being served to you in your normal browser. And then I can navigate around and find a notebook. So this starts up the kernel. You can see kernel starting, the kernel ready. That's it. So now we have a document. And you can see this just looks like a document. And it's connected with a Dyalog interpreter in the background. And we can go in and change things. So you can see we have a lot of data here. But let's say it's a bit too much, so we can change that. And then we can go in and run everything. And if I'm lucky, then, well, you're supposed to get, that didn't quite work. Okay, it seems it might be the connection here that I can't actually go to CIA and get some data from there. But in any case, we would get updated things here. Okay, I'm going to get back at creating content in a moment. This is just to show you how you start up things. So I talked about being able to run things online. So there are these various servers where you can go and you can run it typically for a specific or a few languages that you can use. And you can also go to or will be able to very soon, go to TryAPL and run Jupyter Notebooks from there, at least a significant subset of them. The TryAPL lessons are already actually Jupyter Notebooks behind the covers. And then we have in the works, it's pretty much ready, so I'll show it very soon, the ability to get your own Jupyter Notebook into the TryAPL system and run it there, which means if you create a Jupyter Notebook to teach somebody something, you can host it online, and then you send an email to a friend and say, hey, here's the URL to this Jupyter Notebook, go to TryAPL, plug in this URL there, you can run this lesson I just wrote for you. So the good thing about that, of course, is your friend doesn't have to install anything, although if it wasn't APL and TryAPL, then they might have to sign up for something. The downside to this is that there must be some restrictions, because normally a Jupyter Notebook has unlimited access to everything on your machine. It runs with whichever privileges you give it right there on your machine. An online system running on a server obviously has to be sandboxed somehow, so there are limitations. For TryAPL, it means whatever limitations TryAPL normally puts on your code, the same thing applies to whatever code is inside your Jupyter Notebook. So remember, don't just run away and set up your own web server for people to run Dyalog notebooks, just running the normal system, because they will have unlimited access to your server. Okay, inside the Jupyter Notebooks is just really a JSON document. And so you can have a viewer that just takes this document and displays it, and that includes all the output, as I mentioned. You can send a file. It's just a text file. Anybody can view it. But of course, you can't execute anything if you just have a static viewer. Same thing applies if you were to send a Word document and somebody uses a Word viewer to view it. And there are a lot of online systems that have built-in viewers. If you put a file on GitHub, then it will attempt to render that. GitHub's rendering of Jupyter Notebooks is not perfect, but it's pretty good to get an idea of it. Project Jupyter has a free notebook viewer. That one is really good. So there you can just give it a URL to an APL notebook, and it will render correctly with spacing and everything. Then you can export it. So then it becomes a static document, and you can send it. So let's say you're working as an academic paper, making experiments, changing the data. Once you're satisfied with it, make a PDF out of it. Nobody will ever know that it was a Jupyter notebook. In order to export to some formats, you might need to install something to convert to that format. And of course, you can't change anything. So let's try creating a document. Right, so if I go back to this viewing here, then I can create a new notebook, a Dyalog one. And then there are two different types of cells that you have to use here. There are code cells and there are Markdown cells. Now, we already heard from Kai Jäger about Markdown. So this is the system that's being used to format text. In fact, when we're running notebooks on TryAPL, we are using Markable to format things. So we can choose here between these two types of cells, code and Markdown. And then I can go in and edit it. And a leading hash, that means a heading. Okay, and then we can go in and add some formatting. So for example, for bold text, put double stars around text, and you can see we get kind of a preview of what it will look like. And then for italics, for example, we just put single stars. So this is a classic Markdown. That's just how it works. You can get all the information about Markdown by going up in the help menu under Markdown help. It's not very difficult. And then we can run as if it were this Markdown, which just means to render it. You can see how it became nicely formatted text. This is better than what you can do in that normal comment. Oh, this needs to be Markdown as well. There are lots of keyboard shortcuts you can use as well. So that's what I'm going to use now. You can look them all up. There's this command palette here, and it will tell you everything how you do things. Okay, so now we have this fine academic paper on how to find the mean of something. But of course, this is not enough to calculate. We're not there yet, so we do need to implement the text. So what I can do here is I can insert a cell below, and then we implement the text that it says above. Wait, don't preempt me. I'm going there soon, okay? I'm not done yet. we didn't actually. Yeah, this is not right. There we go. So now you had a preview of how errors look as well. They get nicely formatted. And finally, we need this. Oops. And we can check what the value is. And this is, of course, all wrong. We need to fix this. And we need to fix this. And then we can go and say, run all the cells, like this. We can also go and execute specific cells. Don't have to go into this now. Right. We have some notebooks here online, and this is where you wake up if you saw the webinar. So here we have a bunch of predefined notebooks that are available online. This is pretty much what TryAPL is going to look like very soon. And if I go into the Learn tab, then I can take the URL of one of these guys, and you can see a preview of the render if the internet connection works properly. And we can stick that URL in here and run it. You see, did it render? No. And if we're lucky, yes. So then we're running this notebook right in here in TryAPL. Take this notebook, or we can go and take any of the notebooks that are. Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, right. So we can run things here. We can take any lesson, and we can also download it as a notebook. So then it just opens, it downloads this Jupyter Notebook file, and you can open it with our offline system. Let's create a new one. You can do that from in here. Oops. And I'll just quickly show a little bit of what you can do with more rich output. So we can define some HTML. We can do multiple lines in a single cell as well. And then we have a special user command that's made for this, but it works inside the Jupyter Notebook. It comes with the kernel, and it will also be available in the next release of Dyalog in general. So we say HTML of the heading and the paragraph, and now when we, I'm missing a quote. Look at that. So and then we render it right here with this. So notice this was the result of APL code running. And we can do even more than that, because this user command will recognize HTML, will recognize SVG, so that's a vector drawing format. So we can just write that we want a circle. So this is the center X coordinate, center Y coordinate, the radius, a fill color right here. Here we go. So you can draw things right inside with your code, and of course, let's fix this error. There we go. We can also plot things. So and for things that so we can just write plot. And then we can take some values. So for example, we could say 120. Let's say like this. Plotting y against x, and there we go. We get a nice graph. In fact, we could change plot type and so on. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but you can find all about that by looking at the help for the user command. Everything you can do. So again, you can install on your PC. You can run it online. You can store it with the output so that people can look at it no matter whether they have APL or not. I'm out of time. I do want to say one last thing, and that is this is the last day of the user meeting. And it's so nice to be here with everybody. It would be so nice if we can keep in touch also throughout the year. And so almost 2 years ago, I created this chat room on Stack Exchange, and that has become very popular. In fact, in that part of Stack Exchange that it exists in, it's become the most popular chat room, even more popular than the general purpose chat room that belongs to that Stack Exchange site. We actually have more traffic going on in the APL room. And I know some people have had a hard time finding the place, but this is 3 different ways you can find it. You can go to the Dyalog website, community chat room. You can note down the URL, or you can just search online for APL Orchard. You'll find it. It'll be the first result there. So please come in. We have a couple of people who come from KX. We have a couple of Dyalogers there, but it's really nice to have more of you. So come on over.